Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a unique day to discuss questions of forced migration and refugee issues. It's important because just this week, there's been an influx of up to 15,000 Congolese refugees into Uganda. In Europe, there are concerns, there are issues in the border of Poland and Belarus. And all this is because people are on the move. People move from one country to another because of multiple reasons, but they can be generalized as basically three reasons. One could be environmental, the other could be man-made factors.
The current COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent restrictions, as well as barriers to mobility and resettlement, have further heightened the challenges faced by displaced persons. At the very center of this, geopolitics continues to shape migration, mobility, and displacement. The instrumentalization of refugees and migrants by states is becoming a pertinent issue according to reports by UNHCR. This in turn is fueling dangerous journeys, leaving refugees vulnerable to exploitation and stretching reception capacities in some countries. Belarus, for instance, has been accused of using refugees as political tools to retaliate sanctions from the EU. While the need for sanctuary and protection is as great or even greater than ever, the COVID-19 pandemic has allowed a number of states to achieve what would otherwise have been unthinkable, shutting the door on refugee resettlement as a key pillar of international law and protection. Despite the disparity between Uganda's open door policy, largely credited by the international community and other global responses to the current refugee crisis, the primacy of national interests continues to outweigh each state's international and humanitarian commitment to assist refugees. As the world marks 70 years since the drafting of the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees, many countries seem increasingly unwilling to meet the obligations set out in this convention. The COVID-19 pandemic has raised questions on global solidarity and the legal as well as the ethical obligations states have both to refugees and their own citizens. How does sovereign hegemony shape the geographies of care and responsibility?
This morning or this afternoon, I'm privileged to be joined by these distinguished panelists. They are experts in their fields, and we are going to digest some of the key issues. Of course, when we talk about forced migration and the refugee crisis, usually we tend to talk and discuss about the kindness perspectives of it, the humanitarian perspectives of it, how generous we are welcoming and hosting these refugees, or how ungenerous or unkind some people are. This morning, though, we are going to look a little bit deeply and try to consider some of the critical geopolitical perspectives. In geopolitics, we believe that the primacy of borders, that the competing hegemonic relationships, and that the ever-globalizing political economy play an increasing role to both occasion these conflicts, but also provide responses to them. So we are going to look at some of these things. And I would just like to get confirmation from the team that all the online speakers are on board. But before we go online, let us start from home. And I'm starting from home because usually we think that forced migration is only a result of conflict and not natural disasters, but there are also economic reasons and dimensions to this. And if you went to Entebbe International Airport this morning, you are going to find hundreds of girls or young women headed to the Middle East. My first sight of this worried me deeply, but perhaps I was wrong, because these are people living a country with one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, about 13.3%, and going to find employment in the Middle East. I would like to know from my distinguished panelists, and especially Professor Sarah Selly, if this worries her at all, just like I was worried in the beginning.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Jok, for that kind of question. Ideally, seeking opportunities of better employment should not worry anyone, because labor will always move to find its best worth. So labor tends to move to find where it will get the best returns. So as you've ably observed, that we're a country with one of the highest levels of unemployment in the world. So in that context, for people to seek employment elsewhere in the world, outside this country, should not be a problem. Maybe we should begin by noting that these are not the only people who are working out of this country. There are many other professionals moving, whether to the US, to South Africa. We lost a number of doctors to South Africa for a very long time. So you'll find Ugandans working in all places of the world. But why should this worry us? It worries us because of the terms under which, the reported terms under which this category of workers seems to be working under. Officially, they go very happy, they go singing, they go celebrating. And those who have been at the airport, you have seen them. But the stories we hear about what happens to them there becomes an issue of concern. And this was especially exacerbated with the first COVID-19 lockdown, where we suddenly started seeing the same people camped outside the Ugandan embassy in Saudi Arabia asking to be repatriated. And many of them had a number of stories to tell. So ideally, labor externalization should not be a bad idea, but considering the terms under which they are working, they are young, they are semi-professionals, they seem to go under a middleman in a way that you have labor companies that are taking them. So there is a lot that we need to understand there. What are the returns to their labor when they go there? What are the circumstances under which they are working? But more importantly, why are they going in the circumstances they are going? Everyone has heard the story of what happens in the Middle East, but there are still numbers of people going. Even now, if you go to the passport office, they're the biggest number going. Yes, it does worry me, and it worries me for two reasons. One, what is it they are going away from, and what are we doing about fixing the cause of why they are going? And largely, it's excessive levels of poverty, lack of opportunities for younger people. So people are not going to sit and fold their hands because they've had a horrendous story from the Middle East. So what is it they are running away from? That should be a source of worry for all of us. The second bit is when they go, what circumstances do they work? So it is just an invitation for us to look at forced migration beyond just conflict and war, because there are many reasons, as you said, why people travel.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to you, but Agnes, there is a human trafficking dimension to this labor externalization. Is it a smooth operation if I wanted to go and work in the Middle East? I mean, are there some people who are taken against their will and their interest, for instance?
Thank you very much, Jock. I'm glad that we are talking about, this subject. Yeah, human trafficking is real. You're recruited, transported, harbored, and transferred by the most common, deceit, fraud, for purposes of exploitation. So you do not know. Usually, victims of trafficking don't even know that they're being trafficked. That's why you find that they coach them, for example, to lie to immigration. They'll tell you, I'm just going here to Kenya, because they don't want anybody to spoil that great opportunity they are lying them about. That's why you find that, now the common routes we have, talking about border, they'll use, because free movement of persons, they'll cross via the eastern, routes, Busia, Malaba. They'll use an identity card or what, because it is to move. Then they fly out of Jomo Kenyatta. So we know that that Kenya is a main, transit route. And once you tighten places, they go elsewhere, and move. And if you remember, one time Uganda, even Kenya, said, okay, we can no longer, export domestic work to the Middle East. What happened? They went underground. You can't stop people from moving. You just have to keep improving the processes. Mm-hmm. That's how the externalization of labor involving recruitment agencies came in. And the majority of the people who are being trafficked outside the labor externalization. Mm-hmm. The majority. That's at least what my office is finding. The most disturbing thing is the kind of people who are exploited. It is women, young women, and domestic work. Domestic work internationally is looked at degrading, low skilled. People think cleaning a house or leaving somebody who is taking care of a house is low skilled. I don't see anything low skilled or where you minimize, because even here at home, the person who is cleaning your house, taking care of your children, is paid less than somebody cutting the flowers outside because they're a man. I can assure you that if it was men in domestic work going to the Middle East, there would be special envoys. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, there would be special envoy for this and what. It's because low skilled and women. And there's nothing wrong with going out for domestic work. Because you'll find among the people who are moving, there are those who have gone. If you remember that story of the young lady who came back, she went to a good home. And she came back and got married. I remember the Nabagereka also attending. People were excited. There are people like that. There are stories like that. But unfortunately, there are those who go to homes, just like all of us who are seated here or in this country. We treat our domestic workers differently. In fact, we call them house girls. Even a person who is a big woman and all that, you call them girl. There's disrespect, in that sector. That's where you are getting a challenge. Yeah. Because of the kind of people who are moving, and that's why we need to clean the sector. There's nothing wrong with them moving, because that is work which is dominated, by women.
Yeah. Thank you. Before we move away from the topic, I wanted us to understand if this whole process of labor externalization is a new way of strengthening geopolitical relationships and international relations. Do you think that perhaps the Uganda and or Kampala, working closely with the United Arab Emirates, with Saudi Arabia, or do you think it's actually also a tool for strengthening this kind of relationships internationally?
Oh yes, that's why you hear about bilateral labor agreements. Okay. Right now there's one signed with Saudi Arabia, mm-hmm. and right now the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development is like keeping improving. Now, because you also realize when you're a country negotiating with a country which is higher than you, either economically or a superpower, they are usually unequal negotiation powers. Mm-hmm. So what we have done as a region, IGAD, 80 member states, that let's come together and we speak the same language. They've actually designed a model, kind of things that could go in an agreement, such that when you're negotiating in the Middle East, when you're strict, about certain things to be embedded in, for example, if you say, no, all domestic workers, for example, should have a phone, communication is important, such that if you are strong on that, they cannot say, okay, we can just go next door and get others, where they are not strict about it. So negotiating as a bloc is going to really help, and that is a way, to go. The Asian countries have done it. It's not that it's 100%, but you'll always find it, but it is at least bilateral labor agreements is that political tool that the two parties, countries of origin and destination are agreeing that, we need to work together. That's why you find that pre-departure orientation, for example, is key. And the Ministry of Labor has actually issued, guidelines that, people should prepare. Just like us, even if we are not going to the Middle East, when you're going to a different country, you need to be prepared that, hello, there's winter, or hello, you're going to a Muslim country, you're Christian, but you have to abide by this, that, wherever you're going, you have to be prepared. So it is important, to do that. And the other key thing is continuous improvement. For example, the Ministry of Gender has also issued, the guidelines that if you fraud and your labor recruitment agency, for example, from the 3 months, to 5 years, that, the penalties, as you educate people, you also make sure that you penalize people who are doing the wrong things.
Thank you very much. Let's check if Verena Kasiria is online. We see the situation in Europe. Verena, again, is the head of division for Western Europe, North America, and European policy issues at the Hans Seidel Foundation, which operates from Munich in Germany. I would just like to take this opportunity for you to give us a little context into some of the contemporary forced migration issues pertaining, one, to Germany particularly, but also to Europe as a whole, please.
Yes, thank you. I think the debate in Europe is entirely different than what we've heard now from Professor Sali or from Agnes. So the debate has, however, changed greatly in the past years, and therefore also the issues. I believe we're all aware that in 2015 there was a major turning point in European refugee policy because Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany at that time, decided to open borders and allow in huge amounts of refugees to enter Germany. And at that time, there was a relatively positive attitude towards, opening your borders and, providing a safe haven for those who are looking, but that has really changed greatly over the past years, I want to say, just as people were realizing just how many people were coming in and how big the migration flows were. There has been a change of attitude in the population, probably also in the media, that has really driven the discussion around refugees, migration, open, closed borders. And so we have arrived at a turning point where right-wing populism has increased, where there's a lot of emotion in the discussion, and that has led to people kind of staying away from the topic because it's a very, very difficult topic to discuss. And I think we can look at some issues, some incidents in the past 1 or 2 years that show very clearly that the issues we're facing in Europe or in Germany are looked at from a different perspective. So for instance, we had a huge refugee camp in Greece burning down just last year. And the discussion, how I find, was carried with a lot of sobriety, factualness, lack of empathy, if you will. We hear reports of Frontex, which is the border protection agency of the European Union, and they're conducting illegal pushbacks. And this has been known for some time, but we have now got official reports, but it has somehow gone entirely under the radar. So that does point a little bit in the direction that Agnes has shown, that there's a lack of law enforcement. There's some issues with upholding the rights of refugees or of those who cross borders, but it does go a little bit in a different direction in Europe. We have, until just recently, had deportation flights to Afghanistan. And so I think this shows you that there's just a completely different angle on the discussions. But if you're going to ask what are the issues that are being discussed right now at a European level that are like actively out there, I think some of the discussions pertain to finance. because a lot of people have come to Europe. And well, now there's a big question of who's going to pay. We have social systems that well, would have to make up for certain portions that refugees take up. That is a huge discussion happening at EU level. That then leads to a discussion of protecting our external borders. It leads to a discussion of a holistic EU policy. And we are kind of stuck there. Discussion has not really moved forward. And because there are very rivalry sides in the discussion, we have the Western European countries who tend to at least claim that they hold very high moral grounds, and then we have the Eastern European countries who are living in, well, relative denial of taking on a responsibility of carrying a financial burden or allowing refugees to enter their countries. So that discussion has really stagnated, and I think we would maybe do well from learning from countries like Uganda, who are really advanced in the policy stages and who are, like you guys have pointed out, maybe looking now for the law enforcement and to keep up with the changing developments in the migration sphere.
Okay, and just one more before we come back here. There is something very striking happening in Europe, which I think has never happened anywhere, and this is the weaponization of migrants. And we see this in Turkey, for instance, if President Erdogan is accused of human rights abuses or whatever it is, he threatens to release the over 4 million refugees that are in Turkey into the mainstream European Union. But also we've seen something very striking, especially in Belarus, where President Lukashenko has done the unthinkable. He's basically flying refugees, from one end of the Belarusian border to the Polish border to release these refugees into Europe. This is new. Just to bring it back home, it's like Uganda taking South Sudanese refugees to Malaba so that they can easily cross into Kenya. It's something like that. Would you please give us your 2 cents on this? And how do we counter this kind of threat of weaponization of forced migrants? Thanks.
Like you said, I think the situation is new. The idea of, and this is a terrible thing to say, but it has been practiced in politics, of using human beings as commodity or refugees as commodity for political pressure. That is not new, but the extent to which Lukashenko is right now practicing it is completely horrendous. So I think we need to understand the gravity of the situation, that he is not only flying in refugees and letting them move to the border, but people are paying thousands of euros for the promise of being able to enter the EU, are then reaching Belarus, where they are pushed towards the Polish border. We hear reports of course, beatings, tear gassing refugees, and they reach the border, and we see these horrendous pictures of small children in the forest, elderly people, no food. It's right now winter in Europe, so people are freezing in the nights, people are dying. And he is systematically using this to retaliate against the sanctions that the EU has imposed on Belarus, by the way, as a result of their brutally rigged elections. And so first of all, the situation is brutal on another level that we haven't seen before. But like I said, the idea of using human shields in politics, unfortunately, is not new. And I think this is because we have become susceptible to blackmail. Definitely, because if you look at the situation that has happened on the Turkish border in the past years, the EU has sort of done a trade-off, that not only did they pay for Turkey to take on millions of refugees, but also they entered negotiations about easing of visa processes. So that shows you that there's definitely a certain political discussion, and refugees are being used as a trade product, and that is terrible. But we do have to ask ourselves the question, if we enter this situation of blackmail, are we going to succumb to the pressure? And I think this is the question that is now on the table on the Belarusian-Polish border, where right now the EU is pushing back hard. and attempting to close the border. I've heard the EU Commissioner speak this morning, and she was very clear that the blame lies on Belarus. But then again, we're talking about the lives of people. And this goes a little bit in the direction of what I've said earlier, that there's empathy lacking in the discussion and sobriety. Though I do see both sides, you know, if you do give in, of course, that also sends a political signal. And everybody right now in Europe is scared of having another influx 2.0, if you will, of the situation that happened in 2015. But it might really be one of the turning points of refugee policy right now, what is happening on the Polish-Belarusian border.
Thank you, Verena. We'll perhaps come back to that. But let's come back home and look at the situation, the new situation at the Congolese border with Uganda, with up to about 15,000, basically, running into Uganda for their safety. And perhaps the people from the immigration office could help us, particularly Edgar or Agnes. How are we prepared to respond to such a massive influx? I mean, many refugees have been coming to Uganda every day, but not in their hundreds of thousands, right? How are we prepared? And juxtapose this against the background of a COVID-19 situation where standard operations or operating procedures must be put in place. Edgar, are you in touch with your colleagues at the Congolese border? How is this being handled?
Thank you for having me. Of course, I'm in touch with my colleagues at the border, and the situation has been, like you've articulated, that the situation has been that terrible. So refugees coming into Uganda is not a new thing, right? We are already hosting over 1 million refugees here. But I think what we need to be confronting right now is the challenge of how we mobilize resources to be able to host these refugees. And I think because the 1951 Convention about refugees clearly states that countries that are hosting refugees have the mandate to protect the refugees. But in the same way, the protocols that have followed thereafter have not clearly stated how states can protect refugees. How do they raise resources? How do they, for example, conserve the environment? Because allowing in so many people creates a lot of tension on land, creates some sort of displacement sometimes. So how then are international partners, international community, how is it going to be able to support Uganda's efforts to host these refugees? Because we are signatories to conventions and protocols, and we cannot turn away these refugees as and when they come to Uganda. But we need a bit of help in not only the management of refugees, but also in provision of services. And given that we're in a pandemic also, we need to look at how do we keep our health standards up there so that we contain the spread of the virus. So in all this, it cannot be, it is our responsibility as a country to host these refugees and to protect them. But we need, as a country and globally, we need to think of modalities of how to share the burden, because if Uganda is taking in refugees, they must not just live off our resources, because these are global citizens, like they like to be called. But being global citizens, they deserve protection, and that cannot be issued by a country that is already dealing with the natural, both economically and socially.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think one of Edgar's submissions was really about resource mobilization, and we know that the process of mobilizing resources to attend to a humanitarian crisis is a geopolitical process. And especially the United Nations, this question is directed to Ouma Mildred, who is a senior protection officer at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Now, your work is deeply, deeply reliant on donations from member states of the United Nations, and quite often these donations could be tied to strategic geopolitical interest. Before we go into the geopolitics and how it shapes how these resources come in, is the UNHCR prepared to manage a crisis of this nature, considering the complexities brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you very much, first of all, for having me, and thank you for the question. Indeed, UNHCR, through its supervisory role of the 1951 Convention, has been placed in a position where they are responsible for responding to situations of refugees of whatever magnitude. If we look, for instance, at the 1951 Convention, you find that the most important principle in the convention is the principle of non-refoulement, which is in Article 33 of that convention. And the supervisory role, first of all, starts with ensuring that UNHCR supports states, in this case, our host government here in Uganda, to ensure that they're adhering to that principle. And first of all, making sure that refugees are granted access to territory whenever the need arises. In terms of resource mobilization, as has also been pointed out by my fellow panelists, there is, of course, the issue of international burden sharing. And again, UNHCR does come in to ensure that we bring together key stakeholders and mobilize resources through that context of burden sharing, because we cannot obviously just leave the burden that has been so ably demonstrated by my colleague panelists to one host country, especially when you are looking at over 1.5 million refugees with a fast growing number. So yes, UNHCR has contingency measures in place that they develop together with the host government, as well as with other key stakeholders, UN agencies, as well as NGOs. And we have the refugee response plan that contemplates what the situation is likely to look like over the next period of 2 or 3 years. And measures are in place to make sure that all those scenarios, whether it's the most likely or worst case scenario, taken into account, and if and when they do occur, then measures are activated to respond to the situation.
So there are no particular challenges relating to resources and response. There is just enough, you think?
The resources obviously are quite constrained, especially when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had, resources at some point having to be shifted to respond to the public the public health pandemic that we are faced with. And it is becoming increasingly difficult to mobilize resources. But as I mentioned, in the context of the international burden sharing, we try to mobilize the international community to keep focused on the situation at hand, because it's part of the obligation of the international community that, yes, Uganda is hosting, but the burden cannot be left to Uganda alone. So much as we are cognizant of the dwindling resources globally available for humanitarian purposes, we continue advocating, and we try also to do more with less funding, but at the same time ensure that we articulate and highlight the issues that require the attention of the international community, so that this burden sharing can be adequately taken up and not left to one state.
Thank you. One last one. So the 1951 Convention clearly articulates two key things. One is that UNHCR, of course, provides protection to refugees or forcefully displaced persons. But the second one, which I would like to gather your thoughts on, are questions related to finding sustainable solutions to the causes of this conflict, because it's also one of the mandates that the 1951 Convention gave to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. I ask this because there certainly wouldn't be 15,000 refugees crossing into Uganda if there weren't serious geopolitical questions relating to the relationship between Uganda, between Rwanda, and then the Democratic Republic of Congo. Because then, all the time, if these geopolitical questions are not addressed, then people will keep running, and maybe the entirety of Eastern DRC will suddenly have to find refuge in Uganda, and UNHCR will not have the capacity to manage such a crisis.
Yes, certainly. When it comes to finding solutions or working with we actually do work with governments to try and find solutions. And in this regard, we've also engaged regional bodies such as IGAD. For instance, when it comes to the South Sudanese situation, we are very much engaged in mobilizing particularly the refugee community and making sure that they also participate in the peace talks that are ongoing. We don't do this alone. We do it with quite a number of other organizations to ensure that, in future, we should have a situation where refugees are able to go back to their countries. Because if you look at the three durable solutions, that is voluntary repatriation, local integration, and resettlement to third countries, the most preferred solution is actually to ensure that refugees eventually return to countries where they fled from, and this is preconditioned upon the situation being peaceful enough to allow them to return. So indeed, UNHCR is very much involved in these peace talks, and slowly by slowly we are seeing situations where opposing parties are coming to a table, talking, and we hope that some of these protracted refugee situations could soon be resolved. I will just also mention with regard to the Burundi refugees that such engagements have borne some measure of success, and we have had refugees voluntarily going to see the situation back home and seeing if they can reestablish themselves back in Burundi. And indeed, they came back and said the conditions are such that they can go back. So we have started a process of supporting the movement of voluntary repatriation back to Burundi for those who are willing. And we shall continue also for the other for the other groups of refugees based on the situations in the countries where they come from. I would also like to point out, again, in the context of finding durable solutions, that we are also quite actively engaged in negotiating, particularly with Western countries, to take in some numbers of refugees through the resettlement and also through complementary pathways such as scholarships, educational scholarships, family reunifications, and so forth. Much as, again, this is a very small number, I would say maybe every year it's about 2% of the refugees.
And that percent keeps reducing every year, right? I mean, I think about 10 years ago it was high. This time around it's quite low. It might come to zero, don't you think so?
We hope that, again, in the context of burden sharing, that countries will remain committed to receiving. It did go down significantly, and we are seeing it again coming up. And we continue advocating, even for countries that traditionally did not receive refugees on resettlement, to open their doors to refugees in that context. We've also, in recent times, seen a few African countries opening up their doors, to offer resettlement places to refugees. So we are hopeful that, of course, taking into consideration the geopolitics, that we could still see this increasing further through sustained advocacy.
Thank you very much for your wonderful insights, Mildred. Thank you. I'll come back to Professor Sally. So almost half of the migrants, about 49%, are women. Of course, in Uganda, the number is a little bit high at 83%, being women and children. But we know that women face specific gender challenges around sexual harassment, domestic violence, to mention but a few. What more do you think could be done to make sure that the conditions that female migrants face are kind of bettered, especially by multilateral organizations, but also nation states?
Thank you very much, Donas. First, I think as we proceed in this discussion, we need to understand that refugees and forced migrants are a creation of bad politics, okay? So it's very important that we are discussing this topic at a geopolitical conference. And it is also saddening that we want to focus on making refugees stable and comfortable without fixing the politics that produce the refugee crisis or the forced displacement crisis. And just maybe to recap on what the last speaker said, or what you asked, Uganda doesn't host refugees just from our borders. Uganda's history of hosting refugees begins with the Polish refugees. That was Second World War. We had nothing to do with it. It was politics elsewhere, okay? We've had people coming in because we happen to be the safe haven, so we end up hosting the biggest. And of course now we are having Afghans. I don't know who else we are going to have, but refugees, forced migrants are all a result of bad politics. So even as we seek to make the situation better for refugees, can we explore in the future at the next geopolitical conference, how do we stop creating these kinds of scenarios? Whether we are talking about economic refugees or political refugees, the situation is the same. You've asked a situation on how we can avail the resources. And it's true, resources, when we talk about resources for refugees, we tend to focus on money. And if you're talking about money, in February last year, before we had our first national lockdown, the UNHCR had announced the reduction of allowances to refugees. I think the figure reduced something like 35,000. And the question then was, how were they going to survive? But beyond money, there are other resources we incur as a refugee hosting country. Right now, we are engaged in research, and most of the research we are dealing with is the conflict between refugees and host communities with regard to natural resources. and environmental degradation. So we go back to the issue you have asked on GBV. Indeed, refugees create displacement creates particular vulnerabilities for segments of society that are already vulnerable. In normal circumstances, in a patriarchal society, women and children will be in a certain vulnerable category, either due to resources, due to violence, due to norms and values that make them second-class citizens in their societies. When displacement occurs and rules give way, you tend to get the heightened forms of toxic masculinity and other forms of either militarization and other forms of oppression. So that makes the already vulnerable communities or segments of the society even more vulnerable. So you'll end up with children being trafficked. And if you look at Uganda's statistics alone, even from our wars which we've had internally, the number of kids that are being trafficked are so high, okay? Even now when we don't have an internal war, the numbers are beyond 10,000. I just checked briefly before I came. So the children become vulnerable to exploitation through trafficking, and this could be for economic exploitation, but also for sexual exploitation. The women become even worse exploited because in refugee situations, you cannot talk about prevention from GBV. I mean, we tend to document that quite a lot. But beyond even the GBV, there are other crises we have in these settings. The energy crisis is a very big one in our refugee camps. And why? Because the big populations of refugees in communities that had smaller population, small rural population, has depleted the firewood, okay? And this is again creating the crisis. So without energy, and households cannot be enabled to provide good food, the societies, the families, and the households get under pressure. And when they get under pressure, then GBV occurs. So there things like access to water, things like access to healthcare, all of these become frameworks through which a family under stress receives more stress, okay? And as a result of that, we end up with more violence. And who takes this violence? It's the children, it's the women within the households. So that becomes another crisis. But before I conclude, I would also like to say, even the whole situation of, because the gender roles in many communities allocate to men the roles of provision and the roles of family protection. So as displacement is causing the rules and norms to give way, and women and children are being directly exploited, and men are unable to provide that kind of protection and that kind of role, we are also beginning to document other kinds of stresses on the male side. And maybe we shall need more statistics, but at least at the time we documented out of our first COVID crisis, one of the things we documented was high levels of suicide and male suicide, okay? And the suicide was high for teachers and for refugees in this country, okay? Because by June, we had surpassed the statistics of suicide in this country that we always collect by the end of the year. The majority were male teachers who could no longer work and could no longer drive their borders, but there was also a high fraction from the refugee communities, particularly the refugee camps in the north. So as we look at GBV and what displacement does to the heightening of gender inequality, we need to pay attention to how then this plays out to males and females as they have been conditioned to live life, because this is a new normal which sometimes rubs off the wrong way. So I think it is very important to look at resources, but to look beyond the physical resources. Of course, Uganda always provides the land, they can go and farm, but of course during the COVID lockdown, they couldn't walk long distances because there were limits to that. The UNHCR reduced the funding. So what then does this mean to the gender assigned roles of being a mother, being a father, and then how does this play out? Who takes the brunt of the failure of us living to the social roles? It's the vulnerable categories, women and children. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the insights, and also that you bring in the male perspective, which I think is often missed from mainstream discourses and discussions. Now, one of the signature geopolitical events of the past 50 years probably happened in September, when the United States and their allied forces withdrew from Afghanistan, forcing thousands or even perhaps millions of Afghanis, I think, to be evacuated. And again, we were so generous as a country to host or welcome up to about 2,000 of these evacuees. I also learned a new term, by the way. I didn't know it existed, the evacuees. But 2 or 3 months down the road, where are these evacuees and what kind of response and support is being offered to them? Perhaps the government representatives, particularly Edgar and or Agnes, could give us some insights into the kind of support and management that is being done by the government in this regard.
Thank you very much. Yeah, first of all, yes, we are not directly responsible for the evacuees.
Yes.
And I'm glad that you're using that word
Yes.
because they are not refugees. These are people, Uganda is just used that, okay, the situation is bad, go to Uganda and then we resettle you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that will be done. And also because, you need to protect, it's not nice, when you're in somebody's residence and everybody is always talking that, oh, where are you going now? But they are not people, they are different from what you'd see as refugees. And, coming to that, usually, just like the evacuees, I wish also the refugees that was done because it is really about durable what? Solutions. You will find that refugees have been here like forever. I remember I was at the border of Kenya, for example, when there was election violence. I was actually the one at the border. I remember taking cover with the military and evacuating, people who have watched their children die to a nearby school, while they issue advisories actually to the UN staff and all that to evacuate the country. Remember, it's like immigration officers, it is people at the borders who are always there to receive. Sometimes people forget that bit. So the issue of durable solutions is important. That much as Uganda, just to let people know, to keep reminding ourselves, Uganda is the largest hosting country in Africa and 3rd in the world. We are not the richest, or the poorest, but when a country like Germany, for example, takes in 800, oh my God, the celebration was too much. It was like, my goodness, they are like Jesus Christ. But when Uganda takes on more than, remember even during the COVID-19, as people closed borders, our president opened up, and even they, testing them for COVID and all that, they were protected somewhere. So if every country keeps taking, because we just keep piling and adding, but no one is leaving. Even when conditions in some countries become okay, it took long. Sometimes you'll even be shocked that there are some people who ran from that election violence in Kenya, and they are still in Uganda. And this is a situation whereby you are only allowed to go when you say, I want to go. So some people get so comfortable because Ugandans are so nice, which I thank you very much. They are
so Agnes,
really loving people. Yeah.
Are you trying to say that the Afghanis might decide to stay?
No, they are not, because they are not refugees.
Okay.
They are here, they're on transit,
Okay.
and they are going, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to bring this back to the audience and see if there are 1 or 2 questions that our panelists could address.
I'm called Vicky Namugobe, and I'm a youth leader representing the youth of Sri Lanka to the National Youth Council as a Secretary of Female Affairs. Yes, this issue of immigration to me is a pertinent issue to my heart. The fact that as Uganda, we subscribe to the East African community, and we are moving towards and working towards entering into the East African Confederation, which to me I find it's also a geopolitics instrument. But when we talk about that issue of immigration, we find that as member states, we have signed treaties in regards to free movement of goods and people, especially labor. But if we come to look at the current situation, the wrangles that are going on between the Rwanda and Ugandan border, really how many people can be able to cross and enter into the Rwandan border to seek for employment or any other reasons that is necessary. So the greatest achievement I see today, we have members that are from the immigration offices. I would like to know what is the government putting into place to be able to solve such conflicts in order to ease movement of people, because we Ugandans are taking in everyday refugees, but our people are not having access to go out of the line borders to access other facilities from other nations. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gisa Paul is my name. A student at KU doing a bachelor's in environmental science. My question goes to Mrs. Sari. You have talked a lot about GBV, gender-based violence, and then you have really cited so much on the female gender and the children category. Yet we are forgetting about the male gender. And we currently see that most of the energy is always put on the female gender. And then the male gender is being suppressed. And you realize that men are no longer having a voice within the societies. And this has caused men to take the legal rules or the procedures into their matters of hands, and then it has really messed it all up. Reason being, a man gets a conflict with the wife, and then he can't even run to a nearby police station because women already have a voice there. The policies that have been designed have really sided so much on the female gender, and the male are left out. Why is it that way? And then I have another question. It goes to Agnes. Well, Uganda is hosting a number of refugees daily, day in, day out. And we, the citizens, or the natives of the country, really having issues with self-delivery. And if you go to some of these refugee camps, they are having a better, to some extent, having a better standard. And we, the natives, we are really getting nothing. The government is giving them land, it's hosting them, it's giving all the kind of relief that they really need. But before they are coming, the self-delivery to the natives or the citizens of the country was really poor. And what is the government doing about this? What is the immigration officer doing about this? And
Thank
also,
you, Paul.
All
I
right,
think
thank
those
you.
two would work. But if a visitor comes to your home, you need to treat them well, right? At least for a few nights. Okay, let's have one more question this side.
Thank you very much. I'm called Pierre Derek Kachon, a student here at Makerere University and the final student offering Bachelor of Commerce. Now, my concern goes to the immigration lady. Really, you people, you have not done a lot as far as geopolitics beyond our country is concerned. How? Look at the conflicts between Uganda and Rwanda. Uganda managed to send army in Somalia. What happened? Up to now, we have not seen a complete success. This, at times, I feel like there is a conflict of interest within African leaders. That's why now and then we are having refugees from Congo, refugees from Kenya. Why? Because our leaders have failed to understand what we Africans need. For us, we are not interested in getting resources from Western actors. After all, those resources come with a lot of constraints, with conditions. At the end, even if they were to help us, they even take the little resources we have. Now, I would request, since you sit you on that immigration board, at least you may reach to those officials. The only way we can reduce on refugees is simple. Let African problems be managed by the natives.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's very problematic, but we'll come back to that. Yes.
Well, hello? So, well, let me try to maybe paraphrase this question a bit and address some of what has been mentioned by the panelists before. So we've heard that refugee crisis and forced migration are also results of bad politics. We've heard from the colleague in Germany who was saying that these crises are also often used as, let's say, maybe bargaining grounds. So let me bring this together and ask, from where all of you sit and the engagement and the involvement of you in different policies and negotiations and so on. Is there also a certain political interest in keeping this crisis alive to be able to use them as bargaining grounds? Thank you.
Yeah, lastly.
My name is Andagiri Sendagiri Princess. I'm a business development associate, now consultant.
Quickly, please.
Yes, they are talking about gender-based violence. We are talking about refugees. We are talking about whatever we covered yesterday and today about climate change. But all in that, what is happening is poverty. Poverty is very stressing in homes, families, and now districts. We start with what? From family, you go to Muruka, what, climb as you go. And then comes the geopolitics globally. So if only we can tackle poverty through our homes, families, and all that aspects I've talked about, we shall have come to a tool that's going to fight gender-based violence, and not leaving out the gender males. The gender males have been patriarchy as far as Africans are concerned. But it's high time, me as a princess, I'm saying that, let's be mother, that side. Because mothers were the what? Mothers were what? Pardon? Teach a woman and teach the nation. Teach a woman and feed the nation. So dear males, my counterparts, our dear students, don't take it offended that a woman is on top of the agenda. So therefore, let's understand each other from here, East Africa, Africa, and beyond, that is diaspora and the global world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are coming back to the panelists to respond. I think there were just about 3 questions if I were to summarize, and I'll read them out. I'll ask the panelists to at least pick one. One of them relates to the issue of service delivery, and I would like to bring this to you, UNHCR, to Mildred, how host communities are really being involved in as much as the services that they receive is concerned. Because if we have conditions where, a person in Bidi camp feels much, much better than the person right in the next village, then that might be problematic. Yeah, we'll come back, we'll come to you, please. So that was the first question. The second question, which I think is also very important, is how do we get the East African community as a bloc agree or have consensus on integrated refugee management framework? Because if the burden keeps falling squarely on a few countries, then the principle of burden sharing, becomes quite elusive. And then the last one is about reconciliation of political interest. Of course, it's clear that perhaps there could be certain political interests that ensures or that are interested to make sure that conflicts keep on being prolonged over and over again. And I would like also to gather some thoughts and perspectives on my panelists, how a consensus can be found in as far as this is concerned. So I'll give all of you guys, all the panelists, at least a minute to respond to any of the questions raised. I'll start with Agnes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Many of the questions were actually directed to me. And I think there's also a mix-up on the role of immigration, because they were also saying, why are we in Somalia? Immigration didn't send anyone to Somalia. So in terms of movement, the issue of stringent visa policies is real. That's why you find that Ugandans, for example, are flooding maybe to the Middle East, and they are not going to the traditional, countries, UK, US, and others. So stringent visa policy. What is happening in much of the developed world? They need low-skilled labor anyway, and some people prefer you are low-skilled, but they're not taking care of your human rights and those other words. So they rather have you illegal, so that you just maneuver. So cheap labor, they thrive on cheap labor. And actually there are two things that are driving irregular migration. It is cheap labor and the demand of women to work in the sex industry. If you remove those two, then you are going to lower the irregular or human trafficking, globally. That's why in those countries, fixing their migration policies is a challenge. It's mixed with the politics. Mm-hmm. If you realize during the political season, people are against immigration. There's even a narrative out there which is anti-immigration. People think immigrants are coming to take away your resources. When economies are great, no one celebrates that maybe a refugee or this other migrant has contributed to it. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I tell people who have these narratives in their heads about either refugees or victims of trafficking, please get to know one. People on the move or people who are uprooted, people who are refugees also have their homes and they want to be home. It's just circumstances, and it doesn't mean that they are not educated. They have resources, or if they are put in positions in which they can showcase their skills, then you do see what they are capable of. Mm-hmm. And with somebody who was saying, Uganda is always taking, we've had the leaders around the world who have been once refugees. If it was in the 80s, during that time when Ugandans were flooding other countries, maybe we would have also asked that question. Mm. If other countries also asked, why are we hosting these Ugandans? Why don't they go back? Because, you can become a refugee anytime. So let us it doesn't mean that when other countries are not being nice to them, we should stop. It is not tit for tat. It's like always showcasing and, discussing what we are doing, and like pushing even the East African community and all that. And people quarrel, even in your homes. It's sort of, you quarrel. You can quarrel with your sister and brother. Sometimes the conflict takes long to fix, but sometimes it is faster. So the issue of Rwanda closing the border and Uganda, it will get fixed. The timing, I don't know up to when, but to know that quarreling or not being nice, to the other person, either in your family or what, it's a part of life. But other people will also help you in the due course. Thank you.
It's good that you mentioned the tit for tat theory. I think it's very important. Just because your neighbor is not sweet does not mean that you should be bitter, right? So, Prof, what's your take on some of these questions? Just pick one or two, not all, really.
Thank you very much. I was asked a direct question on GBV and why it looks like the men are being suppressed. I think we need to distinguish between two things. Elevating an oppressed category or a subaltern category to some level of equality does not equate to suppressing the more powerful category. Men have controlled the world. It has been a patriarchal world for long, and as a consequence of this, you see GBV, you see gender inequality in opportunities. Even if we are to consider the simple thing, the topic we are talking about today, imagine refugees, male refugees and female refugees. What are the risks a female refugee has? There are all these things of rape, there are things of unplanned pregnancies, and they will need healthcare services which might not be there in whichever setting they're in. And of course, men do get conscripted for war. So it's true they are all being targeted for their gender, but for different things and with different consequences. If we are to take the issue of externalization of labor, our males are going to the Middle East, and most of them don't want you to highlight that as a problem. Why? Because they are going to work as airport traffic controllers, they are working at construction firms, they have their passports on them. Where are the women going? They are going to domestic homes. What is the first thing that occurs when they arrive at the airports? Their passports are withdrawn. They become persona non grata at that level. So they either obey the home in which they have been taken, or they will be thrown out on the street and they will end up in more serious trouble. So please don't think that when an oppressed group demands for some equality or for some rights, it means they are bringing down the other thing. It just comes to highlight how power is a contestable matter. It's a contestable resource. And people think we need to only hold it in exclusion. And that also goes to what we are seeing as the bad politics that the director Cass talked about, the country rape. Why can't we fix these things? It's because all of these political quarrels are about resources, and resources are contested. So the quarrel, as she mentions, it is about who should have what, who should ally with who should have which strategic engagement with who, and these things play out in political boardrooms. And if they are well fixed, we have peace. If they are not well fixed, we have the troubles we have. But maybe my take should be that since Uganda plays such a significant role in hosting refugees, it should have a significant role in discussing peace in this world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope Paul, you understand this contextualization, because it was really well encapsulated and said. The online speakers, Verena.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to respond to what Anna asked about the political interests within crisis. And I do think that every crisis comes with political interests, and that certainly there is also interest in sometimes keeping a crisis alive for the sake of those who benefit from it. And this observation means that we have to think about refugees and migration very carefully. In Europe, I think the cards are relatively on the table. We know that there are immense political interests, finances involved, but also in a context like Uganda, like Turkey, like DRC, we have to think about this. What are the political interests in the crisis? So I think it was in 2019 that we had the scandal in Uganda where it turned out that there were quite a lot of refugees listed that actually didn't exist. But also beyond this, maybe we should ask ourselves, if we have a leader and we see how they treat their people during elections, what would be their interest to be so generous and bring more people into the country? All of a sudden they are showing this generosity and humanity. So I think we need to think very carefully about what are the political interests behind refugee and migration flows. And since we are talking about interest, allow me also to say one thing to the gentleman. I think it was the third question, who said that African solutions for African problems. I think the idea behind this is great, but there are certain challenges that are global. I mean, trade is global, globalization, digitalization are global issues, climate change are global issues, and some of these issues bring forward refugees. So we do need to think about this on an international level. The EU-AU had a summit 2 weeks ago, and there was a strong commitment to partnership, and that is a good step in the right direction. But it doesn't mean that you can't have local solutions for local problems. And a fantastic example for that is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which just entered into force this year, and which has this idea of promoting wealth and generating better income, boosting intracontinental trade. And that will then lead to improved livelihoods, which hopefully also leads to reduced conflict and reduced migration flows.
Thank you very much, Verena. And Mildred, any thoughts on the host communities and the refugee dynamics? Is it true that you guys, give too much support to the refugees? Indeed.
Well, there's been this perception, which I would say is a valid perception, because you find that the places where refugees are hosted, in most cases, are underserved communities within themselves. So, and this is not just Uganda, it is a global situation, at least an African situation. So some years back, a comprehensive refugee response framework was developed by key stakeholders. And this framework ensures or aims at ensuring equitable socioeconomic support and improved basic service delivery for both the local communities and the refugees, as one way of ensuring that asylum space remains open. So what are some of the things that we are doing under this framework? The refugee hosting in itself is a humanitarian undertaking. And indeed, if you're talking of extending services to the local communities, it goes beyond the scope of humanitarian undertaking to something, akin to development. So through this framework, we have been engaging with development actors to also ensure that in the context of refugee hosting, they bring services to the communities. And Uganda was one of actually the first countries to sign up as a CRRF, the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework country. And we've had particularly the World Bank, putting quite a significant amount of money into infrastructure within the refugee hosting communities. We have, whether it is courthouses, whether it is roads being built in those places, these are being done within the context of development. And this, engagement of development actors will continue to ensure that the needs of the host communities are actually also being taken into account.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Molly Ajonye joined us a little bit later. She heads a women's group in one of the refugee sites, one of the resettlement sites. Just for you to know that in Uganda, we actually do not refer to refugee camps as camps, but they are resettlement sites. And just because I don't want to leave you out of the discussion, we've been saying here that Uganda has been applauded for having a very generous refugee policy, giving people like yourself land, people like yourself having the freedom to move from one part of the country to another. Is this true? Is this what you feel as a forcefully displaced person yourself?
Yes, thank you. My name is Mola Adonia once again, a woman from the refugee settlement, Yumbe district. That question indeed is true. First of all, I appreciate the government of Uganda for hosting us in a large number in Yumbe district, the refugee settlement. It is true that as refugees in Uganda, we have freedom. In movement, we are moving free. Some of the things we are accessing, they are also free of charge. For us as refugees, we are sharing them with the host communities. The schools, we have host community children, whom our children who are in the settlement, they also use them together with the host community children. The markets, we are sharing them. Like the things which we are selling, they also come and buy. They are bringing their things. We say these things equal, my dear. For us, we are here in good way with the host communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that Molly's submission really brings to a beautiful end our conversation this afternoon. Just so you know, when Molly was forcefully displaced to Uganda a few years ago, she couldn't speak English, she couldn't communicate quite effectively, but thanks to organizations like the UNHCR and the UN Women who gave her the opportunity to receive adult education, she can quite heavily articulate her thoughts and perspectives. So on my behalf and on behalf of the organizers of this conference, I would like to thank organizations like the UN, but also give a big vote of thanks to my distinguished panelists and speakers for being so erudite, for being so fluent, and so intelligent in their submissions. And to the panelists, thank you very much for being a beautiful audience.
And sisters. So that's the kind of borders. So to some people, they're just imaginary. That's why also, like, when you talk about border management, let's move away from thinking about, that land, the mass, that you can manage a border even when you're not at the border. That's very, very, critical. And when we're talking about forced migration on whether to open or what, in Africa, we realize that when people are on the move, contrary to what people think that Africans are rushing to Europe, Mediterranean Sea, you've seen people dying, the majority of Africans actually move within the African continent. I think the International Organization for Migration, 175 million, moving within the continent. And so the issue about migration has also been politicized. But we also know that Uganda, we've had those open border policy. When I say open border, it doesn't mean that we have opened to the criminals. It means that we are opening to those people who are running away, from their countries, from their homes. If you realize Uganda is sandwiched among the Great Lakes region, we are part of IGAD, we are part of the East African community, and you find that we are open because if somebody's house or somebody's in danger, for us Ugandans, we open. I'm not just even talking about government, I'm talking about the people of Uganda. They are so friendly because when you bring in refugees, of course, they live among the communities. That's why we find that, they live side by side. It is settlements, not even camps. So they're allowed to grow food, there's freedom of movement, because we know what it means. Because even in Africa here, generally in Uganda, when your neighbor, doesn't even have salt, you give them some. So the way we behave with our neighboring countries, the way we behave with even our neighbors, as Uganda. Now the challenge we have is that not everybody in the world is like Ugandans, okay? And many times people even there are these debates that why are we taking on? Because in Uganda you can imagine 1.4 million and we are still counting refugees. Uganda is the highest host of refugees in Africa and third in the world. And we are not even the richest people in the world, so you can imagine. And we've seen scenarios where, for example, Germany took on about 800 refugees, and everybody was excited. There's a lot of, hey, it was like, this is Jesus they are taking. But we've taken so many, but I don't think they celebrate us enough. And when also people say, why are we taking many and others? So in our discussions, that's why we tell people that no, it's not tit for tat. We do it because it's the right thing to do. It's the morally right thing to do. And we've seen that unlike other forced migrants or other people on the move, these people don't choose to move. And in our discussions, I remember talking about that. Let's also imagine who is a refugee, who is a forced migrant. some people equate them with the poor people, people who are not having skills, who have come to take away. They do not know that the people, when war breaks out, even doctors are running, even professionals are running, people who are really skilled, such that these people have what to contribute, even when they come, to countries like ours. First of all, because of the positioning in which we are. We don't live in an island. So when your neighbor's house is on fire, yours is also on fire because it's going to multiply. Or we are not excited that people are running to us and we are all this. We want people to be in their homes. Just like how you travel elsewhere, whatever reason, home is always best. Okay? And so when that is happening, that means trade. It affects trade relations. It affects movements of people. Even the border, communities themselves. Even the nature of progress. That when you're fleeing, I know this because I remember fleeing away from the Lord's Resistance Army, and I was younger. That means education is stopped for a while because you're internally displaced. So while other people are ahead with education, for you are doing a catch up. So just like these refugees, like they are away from home for a long time. You don't even know when is the right time to return. And the longer you keep away from home, you can imagine when you leave home, you find your home, either it's gone or the land. Remember even the IDPs, let's not forget, because even forced migration, even IDPs. And for me, also working in the world of human trafficking, those are also, they're also in that category because it's kind of migration that they are living but against their will because they've deceived them. You leave home, somebody has given you, has deceived you about opportunities, and you get there, for example, sexual exploitation. You get there, and you're like, no, this is not, I thought I came to work in a supermarket. Now, all of a sudden, they take you to a brothel. And when you say, no, this is not what brought me here, they say, okay, pay up because they've paid for your air ticket and everything. You're losing time. You're losing time. Where you thought you'd work, to progress in your life. Many of the women, for example, especially those who are in the move, who have gone to the Middle East, many of them have children and family relations. The men in their lives have abandoned the children. That's why they're on the move. They want to take care of their children. So if you're stuck in a trafficking situation, you can imagine, how many people are relying on you that your life there, that it's not just affecting your life, but also of your children, of your relatives, of your parents who are on the move. So the issue of, it's not even just Africa, because much of, when you're having your people on the move, it affects the geopolitics, okay? And this is, and also the category of people moving, young people. So if it is young people who are not productive, who are being enslaved, you see what that is moving. If it is young people who are being displaced as refugees, you are robbing them from the participation, not only of their countries, but we are also part of IGAD. We are also part of regional communities. We are part of the global village. That's why we find that Global Compact for Migration affects all of us, that there are pronouncements on how we should move, freedom of movement and all those. So we are living in a global village. So we are not even talking about what is affecting Uganda, but it affects the region, it affects the relationships with us, with even the outside world. Yeah, the challenge we have, that much as we have the open policy, within Uganda and here, the developed world have stringent visa policies. They've closed out. And part of the challenge is the narrative that goes, it's been politicized. During politics, name it, in the developed world, it's always a contentious issue. The narrative has always been that all those migrants come to take away our jobs. When the economies are booming, no one even thinks that these migrants are contributing, to that economy. There are even countries, look at the USA, Canada, Australia, those are countries of migrants. There are people, indigenous people they found there, okay, whom they went, and occupied the lands, okay? But they are now refusing others to come. They are closing off. They forget that all of us are migrants in a way. So now they realize, oh, let's close.
And if you notice, even on the issues of refugees, you know, for us we allow, you know, the mass, you know, the prima facie and all that. For them, they just come and pick. And the issue of durable solution is very, very key. Like I mentioned when we are talking, that look at Uganda, okay? So you have 1.4, but you just keep accumulating people coming, but they are not leaving. You see, that's the challenge. That while you're hosting, fix the challenges which are making these people move in the first place. Let other people also share this burden. That, you know, you know, other countries taking up more of these refugees. That let's share. Don't leave a country like you. Come on, a country like Uganda, you know, a size of Oregon. Oregon, just one tiny state here in the U.S. That's our size. But you can imagine we are hosting 1.4, and actually almost 1.5 million. You know, right now. So it shows you that if we can host and you are not that rich, that means other people can also take on, you know, a handful. Thank you.